And now what we're going to really focus on here in this session would be learnings from publishers and societies, well, university presses and societies, sorry, and how they're adjusting to this challenging environment and the impact that's having on scholarly publishing. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Laura Brown, Senior Advisor of ITHAKA S&R, Roger Schonfeld, who's the Director of Libraries and Scholarly Communication at ITHAKA S&R, and Judy Luther, who's the President of Informed Strategies, who will talk about the publishing trends, challenges, and opportunities at the challenging time for publishers.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. I'm Laura Brown, a Senior Advisor at ITHAKA, and I think I know most of you from my recent time as Director of JSTOR, and before that, President of Oxford University Press. So I'm really glad to be with all of you today. We're going to be talking about some themes from a study that ITHAKA S&R did with university presses and with society directors during the time of COVID. Since this is a mix of university presses and societies here, we thought it would be interesting to treat these together. And much of this will be familiar to you. After all, you're living it. But we hope it helps to set the table for the discussions to come. So if you go to the next slide, these are just some of the themes we've heard. Next slide. So we heard a lot about financial uncertainty, how it was a norm for societies. There was, uncertainty. It varied depending on the relative mix of the reliance on conferences, publishing, and membership revenues. And for presses, it varied depending on journal book mix and diversification. But for both small presses, were feeling the pressure much more. They were having to make cuts, and many of these cuts felt like cuts to the bone. And some of them even talked about worry about whether they would have a future. There was also a lot of worry about books, membership dues, and meetings. We heard about the bottom falling out of institutional print book sales. There's a lot of hope that the digital books would make up for this and the retail sector, but there's still a lot of worry. And then on the part of societies, there was real worry about the annual meeting. In some cases, attendance was half of what it had been. So there was less worry about journal revenues. I think it was just too early to tell, really. There's a lot of, we hope for the best, but we're planning for the worst. And there was an interesting trend about guarantees and the role that they were playing. We heard a lot of people say, whew, we dodged a bullet here because we went with commercial publishers. So this gave them a measure of financial security, but it will be really interesting to see how this works out for the commercial providers if the predictions about the economy are as dire as they have seemed. So productivity, everyone talked about with the urgency of the pivot to online, that productivity was really high. There was no fall off in publishing schedules. But there was a concern about what the outlook for longer term was. People are just tired of remote. And there was a question about whether we have the right productivity measures for everything except the production cycle. So this is going to be an important question as we adapt to new business beyond business as usual. We also heard a lot about the popularity of weekly or bi-weekly all-staff meetings, just the value of connecting the whole staff regularly, getting everyone on the same page. Is this going to continue in the future? I think a lot of people are thinking, yeah, it should. It seemed like it was a really positive thing from COVID. In terms of the future of telework, it looks like the hybrid work from home office is going to be what the future looks like. Lots of advantages to that. The recruiting advantages, in some cases savings, but also disadvantages. It's very hard to build community in those spaces, and especially for new staff, and of course, Zoom fatigue. So it's going to be interesting, but everybody sees something hybrid in the future. We were really impressed by how quickly people embrace change. The invention, I guess, was the mother of necessity here, but a lot of moves into digital processes on the part of university presses, electronic bound galleys, electronic submission systems, and a lot of invention on the part of societies in the scramble to put on virtual meetings. So finally, we heard, we thought we were going to see a lot of change and pressure on OA, moving to OA, but we didn't see any extraordinary pressure except for opening up things around COVID. Most presses seem to be on the same trajectory, skepticism about OA business models for books, and the same kind of mix of OA and subscription journals. So if you go to the next slide, one of the opportunities and challenges we heard that was really interesting was around events and meetings and webinars. And the biggest worry we heard is that attendance is likely to stay fallen off in the future, even after COVID restrictions, because of departmental professional budget cuts and faculty retrenchment. But there's virtual meetings are opening up all kinds of possibilities for increasing international attendance, from getting more junior faculty involved, a lot of interest in regional and theme-based meetings. So expect to see more of that in the future. Societies are looking for ways to maintain exhibitor revenues, and scholarly publishers are looking for new ways to reach disciplinary audiences online. So this looks like an opportunity for real collaborative reinvention in this space. We hope that that's the case. We're going to need better technology solutions. Everybody felt that. The bar's raised, not just the technology itself, but staff expertise to be able to put on better meetings. So that's a place that we're all going to need to go. And there was also a lot of interest in the how virtual creates this potential for new audiences, both within the discipline and beyond the discipline and beyond the academy, in terms of member prospecting, in terms of business intelligence, in terms of public mission benefits. So that's a really interesting opportunity from the pandemic. And I would say that nobody knows what to charge right now for their annual events or professional meetings. It's just all about experimentation now. So, so that looks like a rich place for impact. If you go to the next slide, we heard this interesting quote. We are in a better situation from university presses. This was from a society director, and it really, I'll give you a chance to just read it, but it really got us thinking, what are these trade-offs? Societies certainly have an advantage of a more diversified portfolio. They've got meetings, membership, publishing, some cases professional education, other cases professional markets. And presses have the advantage of a more diversified list. They're not just in one discipline, and they have a diversified market in the retail. So societies have a better angle into their field. They're not dependent on trying to interpret that from afar. University presses basically get subsidies from their parent organizations. Societies are out there on their own. They have nothing to fall back on but their own wits. So we're interested in what you think about this. It was an interesting set of comparisons to us. And finally, if you go to the last slide, we asked this question about whether it was time to just, hunker down or is it a time for experimentation? And we thought this was an interesting quote. The spoils are going to go to whoever is most adaptable. And if you just watch how things are changing, there's going to be huge opportunities here. So we leave you with that thought about where the pandemic might take us. It's definitely a time for paring back, cutting unessential costs, but it's also a time to experiment and reinvent. And with that old adage, don't let a crisis go to waste. So I'll turn it over now to Roger.
Thanks, Laura. It was a lot of fun to do these interviews with scholarly publishers together, with the societies, and to have a chance to hear about some of the real innovation, but also some of the real dilemmas that they're facing. So thanks for walking through all of that together. I thought I would just add one or two more considerations based on some of the variety of work that S&R is doing more broadly on the dynamics facing academic libraries, their budgets, their own transformations and cutbacks that they're facing, and some of the broader issues that we're picking up in other parts of the publishing community. So let me ask for the next slide here. So I wanted to really take a moment to emphasize the widespread disruption that we're seeing to the instructional model at colleges and universities everywhere. Even the institutions that are open for some amount of face-to-face teaching right now are seeing instructional models that are really, really different than what they'd seen before. They're hybrid in one way or another. They have students learning remotely to a very substantial extent. And so there is this, you could call it a digital transformation that's taking place in higher education. And that is, having a variety of sort of knock-on effects on scholarly communications, and will have a variety of knock-on effects on scholarly communication. Laura referenced some of the changes to the book sales markets. Certainly there are effects based on substantial reductions that many libraries have chosen to make in acquiring print books, both while they were physically closed when they were not taking deliveries of print books in many cases, but also as a result of trying to build resiliency into their model and adapt to this more disrupted instructional and research model. So lots of opportunities in the ebook space for those organizations that are positioned to take advantage of some of those opportunities. One of the things that in the library space that we're seeing and it's not just really libraries, it's really the kind of collection space, is the significant importance of digital collections that are, the way that I've come to think of it is that they're moving to the center of the ecosystem. So as some of you may know, HathiTrust, the platform that's shared by mostly research libraries, but also some other academic libraries, as a place for some of the digitized outputs of the Google Books project and various other digitization initiatives. HathiTrust became an absolutely essential partner to many libraries during this period when print stacks were physically closed. And so collections like that is moving into the center of the ecosystem in a variety of ways that we haven't really fully seen before. This I think is a qualitative shift. And and in parallel, we're seeing budget cuts for a variety of academic libraries, but cuts where it's not just that the budget cut and there's a new budget, but in some cases the magnitude of those cuts is unclear because of spending controls that have been introduced. So all of these things together are producing a kind of an acceleration in some of the shifts towards digital that we have long anticipated, but have been trickling out on a year-to-year basis, and it feels like there's quite an acceleration or transformation taking place right now. Let's go to the next slide. And the other observation that I just thought I would share right now is it's really about the changing ways that the journal process is working. Now this may be more for the sciences certainly than for other fields, but I would guess that we'll see some implications of this for journal publishers writ large over the course of time. What we've seen over the last 6 or 9 months is a tremendous acceleration in the time from manuscript submission to publication as a result of COVID-related science work, and the pressure that preprints have put on traditional journal publishers to keep up with the preprint timeline, which is to say an almost immediate timeline. So the peer review and editorial processes have been dramatically accelerated in some of the health sciences and other fields that have focused on COVID-related research. At the same time, we've seen some notable retractions, papers on, for example, hydroxychloroquine and some of the other areas where there's been substantial public interest. There's been enormous media interest in the science taking place in real time. This is not something that folks have have expected in the past, and the research has been politicized, and so there's been this dramatic acceleration, but also some really notable and important missteps. And I think that's raised questions, and it's going to continue to raise questions about how the trust that publishers develop and that they ask all their constituencies to see in them, how that trust is maintained. And I think we're going to see some pressures on the editorial processes and some opportunities to think about transformations to the editorial processes over the long run. So let me stop there, and believe I'm turning things over now to Judy.
Thank you, Roger. It's great to be on the panel with both of you. I titled this section 2020, the year of fast forward, reemphasizing Roger's note about the acceleration of existing trends. We're certainly seeing that and its effect upon societies and upon all publishers. There are many different ways that this is affecting us, and one that has stood out for me in particular is the change that's occurring in terms of the transition to digital for online presentations. And I see this in the broader context of an expanding network of research content. We all had publications, DOIs, kind of helped journals and journal articles take their place in the landscape. Whereas I think readers were more important for books in terms of them having a solid place in the digital landscape. But along with those, over time, we also had to deal with supplemental files. And they were usually submitted for the article along with the article and included with it. DataCite, Crossref was there for the journal articles. DataCite came along at the time that data and code were being included and growing. And that's an area that we're going to see getting a lot more attention. I've seen some grants focusing on computational skills needed for the workforce, and am aware of and working with some societies for whom that is part of their forward planning. And it's surprising to see how much of that's showing up in the business literature as well. So I think we'll see that area grow. But we've also seen in the last 5 years a dramatic expansion of preprints. They've been around for 30 years with the Physics Archive, but the addition of biology, chemistry, and engineering with major preprint servers has really opened up the world of what is available openly to everyone. What's interesting to me about that is the way that it expands readership for the global environment. Under discussions about equity, inclusion, how can we make publishing more inclusive? Certainly preprints can help with that. But they also took their place in the landscape, and from my perspective, when they had their own DOI. And a schema that came with it that said, here are the things that we want to make sure we record, so that there's a standard across all organizations and a set of data that could be collected both for analysis as well as primarily consistency. Most recently in this year, we're seeing DOIs available for presentations. The online, this not only the suddenness of the transition that we've been confronted with, which, as we know, are creating meetings, virtual meetings just like this one, and have dramatically affected societies, and their members who are young researchers have to make presentations as part of their career advancement. So the necessity of having a DOI associated is a necessity right now. It's still in its infancy, but I think it will become a necessity over time because that will then link the presentations with the broader body of research. And that will be significant for the opportunities to really begin to see the evolution of research. For a while now, there have been observations being made about the expansion of beyond publishing of the researcher's life cycle that is digital into this space where more of it is available to more people. And I see DOIs and the metadata and the structure that comes with that as a way of linking all of this research together. Next slide, please. So we've been accustomed to reading. I gave some thought to what's so different now. Why does it feel so very different? And what are the risks? What are the opportunities? We're very much accustomed to reading text. Text, even if we no longer have a print version of a journal, we still want to have the articles available as a PDF so they can be printed, so they can be transmitted, so they can be saved. So we have not yet gotten away from a page-based text system, even though there are more images in journal articles, and I see them particularly in the life sciences, where they haven't always had such colorful images. But the text ties us to a screen of some sort. Next slide, please. And to some extent, we're limited in the number of hours a day that we want to spend on a screen. I think that also speaks to the rise in the popularity of podcasts. So the opportunities to listen to content that is previously been presented. Now, if you're tied to visuals with a presentation, clearly you may want to have it on a small device with you in the coffee shop. But for people who want to listen while they're out walking their dog, while they're doing other things, being able to listen to a presentation remotely and as an option to having to read it is, I think, another dimension of having access to this content in digital form. So the form factor actually does make a difference, but it also creates a whole different set of files and file structures. There are other advantages to having presentations online. Over the last 5 years, I've watched the evolution of slides and an audio recording, then video of the keynote speakers, then video of in every room at the Society for Scholarly Publishing. The Charleston Conference has gone the same way. Now it's the push of a button. When we're doing an online presentation, it can be an automatic record. And what this does is enable the reader or listener to time, or viewer, to time shift that content to a time that would be more convenient to them. And how many times have you been at a meeting where 2 speakers in parallel sessions were both on your list of people you wanted to hear? Having recorded sessions will solve that problem as well. So for all the adjustments that have had to take place this year to be able to create and shift to online presentations, there are a host of opportunities embedded in having this format more widely available beyond the meeting. There are young researchers who are actually linking to their audio files from their Vita as an example of the presentation that they made at a meeting. So I think those opportunities will prompt us to think more creatively about what can be done. The online presentations now from the speaker's side has also changed the way that we approach our content. Some societies have asked their speakers to take a normal full-length presentation, turn it into a poster, video record themselves, and submit that. Then the panel itself is a live discussion of several people, including the authors, about their research. So there are different ways to try and engage the audience in terms of the dynamic nature of the content, or trying to make it more dynamic instead of a static presentation. There's some meetings where they're limiting the time of the presentation to less than an hour. Or if it's a 2-hour session, there's a 5-minute break in the middle. So there are also networking opportunities that the current software tools are kind of stretching to fill. But these online presentations with a DOI is something that is quite new. The vendors who are doing that are marketing it as a benefit to the academic societies. And it certainly appears as a benefit to the presenter who otherwise is concerned that this recording will be lost. It can now be kept track of. They can add it to their ORCID profile, and it becomes potentially part of their VITA. So the outlook for societies is both risky and with opportunities. I agree with Laura. I think that societies actually run a gamut. Those who have had either reduced membership due to a lot of retirements of the boomer population and not as many younger members joining, the potential impact of fewer tenure track position and more adjuncts can also affect society membership. But there are a number of societies who have done sufficiently well over the years that they have built up a reserve. And they're going to be the ones in potentially in the position where it'll be easier for them to make a transition into this next period, because it's going to be a time of experimentation. There isn't anything carved out in stone now in terms of where do we go from here. There'll be a lot of experimentation about membership. What's the value? What additional content is added to the value of membership? How do you charge for meetings? Do you charge more for ones that are available after the session? Can you break it out and charge, for a day? Certainly for people who are sometimes attending a 3-day meeting, that's an option now. But you can break this up also by topic and aggregate it over years. So it's not just about what's new and different this year, but I think it's an opportunity to bring the voice of the researcher and the presenter forward. Some of the challenges at this time is that there are no standard schema, the DLIs that are being given out. It's in that kind of broad opportunity of adapting a DLI for a variety of content that doesn't have a high enough volume yet to require the same sort of schemas. I mean, of agreement across the industry about the data that should be in a schema. And societies are also finding that there's a really broad range of having very low attendance because the meetings are significantly different than what they've been accustomed to. And the software tools also run the gamut in terms of the capabilities they offer to support societies. On the other hand, I'm seeing a wide variety as I attend a variety of meetings where there's a growing level of both awareness and sometimes capability to support networking. And that is probably one of the key benefits that a society brings to its members. In addition to convening them, I've heard long-term members of societies, having served in the role of president, saying that the biggest appeal of the society was this is where they met their co-author and they wrote the paper, and that was what earned them tenure. So the type of loyalty to societies that has been there, I think, is going to be changing as the senior population retires and this new population of millennials and others entering the workforce who can connect more directly with each other through a variety of other networking tools will be prompting societies to think about their mission, to think about what the value proposition is for membership, and to think about content more widely written. So we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us.
Great, thank you all very much for a very informative presentation, and especially in covering such critical issues today that I know are facing many of publishers and societies across the board from our university presses and many of the contributors that are participating today. So I'm gonna, one of the things here, well, first of all, let's get to the first polling question, and then I have a comment, Judy, in particular, I wanted to come back and ask you, but we have a couple polling questions for you to fill out here. The first one is, for your organization, would you say now is the time to make cuts, stay even keel, no changes, slowly experiment with new ideas, immediately implement impactful changes, or you're not sure? And while we get some information on this first poll, Judy, one of the things after just kind of going through your presentation, I was thinking about is having participated in presentations at ERNL in Charleston, you mentioned that one. I remember really important information that was presented, but it was so difficult to try to find it. And then you're looking through prior posted presentations. There was really good detailed information. And first of all, I had to try to remember what presentation it might have been. And then in that presentation, trying to find out that what specifically I was looking for. And it was just almost impossible to do. So it seems like what you're talking about and is more probably moving forward with DOIs related to some of these presentations, but really starting to do that more as a standard as we see more and more emphasis around presentations and virtual conferences. Does that seem right?
Yes, John, absolutely. I would agree with you. I think the reason that I'm highlighting it now is because we do not yet have a schema to go with this that says, here's the metadata that you need. And that metadata is really crucial for discovery. So the whole discovery layer for researchers, I don't think we've addressed yet within the industry. The ORCID ID offers some promise for that in terms of giving us a single reference point for a speaker, author, however researchers show up in the research and the presentation space, as well as their whole research life cycle seems to be emerging online, and that actually, I think, is the goal overall for the broader population. The other component that goes with it, I think the whole discovery component is going to evolve over time. I think I'll stop there, John.
Perfect. Yeah, good. We'll pause for a moment. So let's take a look. We got some of responses back from the first poll. So yeah. We're going to go ahead. It looked like the majority of people in the response came back with slowly experimenting with new ideas. So we can go to the second poll. We'll come back while people are filling that out and talk a little bit about some of those results. So the second poll here was a question: what themes from the University Press Director interviews do you feel apply? And financial uncertainty is the norm, productivity remains high, and pivot to remote workforce, likely a future of working from home, hybrid office, change is embraced by necessity. It's all over the map with open access. And while we're asking the publishers to fill this one out, coming back to our presenters, any surprises that people are slowly kind of thinking about what changes to make? Does that seem sort of common from your understanding as well from your discussions with university presses and societies?
Maybe I can start on that. I think it's, no, I don't think it's surprising. I think there's a lot of question of resources. You know, lots of presses are strapped anyway, and to try and find the bandwidth to be experimenting is a challenge. I think knowing that, it's encouraging that many are still working to explore. And we certainly heard that when we did our interviews, that there was actually some pretty interesting and innovative areas that people were looking at. So I also think it's really smart to explore these things in, you know, in stages, and to learn from what kinds of experimentation happens. So I think it's a good strategy anyway to be thinking that way. So not surprised from my perspective.
Great. Well, this is going to be a tough one here. It's pretty much, looks like we're pretty even, really, kind of across the board. I guess that most of these themes, I know that got highlighted there, Laura in particular, really seem to have a lot of application. So I know you're just getting a chance to look at this now, but what you're feeling here, does it seem pretty consistent with what you expected, or any surprises?
Kind of thought that financial uncertainty was going to be the highest, but I'm really encouraged to see this, because I think that it's reflective of the, it's a wide portfolio of thinking that's going on in this space. And I was curious to hear from other people why they answered that way as to reflect on it myself. But, I think some of these things like the hybrid workspace, that's going to be a really interesting space to look at. I also think the question of, I thought we were going to find more change from pressure to open things up because of the switch to online learning and so much more remote work. But, I think it was interesting that people don't know exactly where they're going with that. I don't think that's changed so much, and it's interesting to see what people had to say about it.
Great, thank you, Laura. And again, just to provide some additional feedback to the presenters, if you're able to put any of those comments or so in that Slack channel, we'll make sure to summarize that, present that back to the presenters with a little more detail and information. I've looked, there's some really good dialogue going on within those channels from some of the other presentations, so really hope we can get some additional feedback and engagement there. I'm going to go ahead and I've got a couple questions here, but before I do, since we started a few minutes late for everybody, we're still going to aim for 1:30. We may go a little bit over that time period. I know we were kind of keeping this to 45 minutes, so hopefully you all can stay around, and we'll really aim for a 1:30 timeline where we'll wrap up. So the first question, Laura, will be directed towards you. And that is, can you describe the types of societies you interviewed and/or whom these trends really apply to?
Sure. So we interviewed a mix of societies. About 50% of them were STEM, and 50% were humanities and social science. They were all US based societies, so we can't make the same kind of claims about international that, although, some of them have a large international membership. And they were about 1/3 small, 1/3 medium, and 1/3 large. So it was a pretty good variety that we talked to. And the same was true of the university presses, the same kind of mix, although more humanities and social science.
Thank you. That leads into the next question, I think, pretty well here, and that's, do you feel the concerns for university presses and societies are the same in North America and other parts of the world? And maybe Laura, I'll see if you can give perspective on the university presses, and Roger, maybe you can give some perspective on the society. So start with you, Laura.
I don't feel qualified to give an absolute answer to that, since we didn't really talk to a lot of the university presses outside of the US. But we did hear some things about that. We heard, for instance, that there were more sort of mandatory policies from the government level about furloughs, for instance, and even some support, some financial support for that, which would have seemed, I think, good to some of our US colleagues. But I honestly think that the publishing environment, that drops in library revenues and budgets, and all those kinds of things that we are hearing about, the challenges are probably across the board, international and US. Roger?
Just looking for the mute button, sorry. Yeah, I think, as Laura said, we really focused our interviews on the US for both of the projects. But for the societies, I think one of the things that was most interesting internationally is that you have these, in some cases, these societies that are geographically organized for similar or identical disciplines. So the chemistry society for this country and that country and the other country, and there's 3 or 4 different ones, or the biology society or the history society or whatever it may be. And one of the things that came out in a couple of the interviews that we did was how those societies are actually thinking differently about one another today than they were even a year or two ago. Whereas in the past, it was like, okay, those are our friends and international peers, and you know, we're all part of the same alliance in a lot of ways for our field. Today, the term that one of our interviewees used was that they are our frenemies, in the sense that we're now competing with them. If we're doing a virtual event rather than a in-person event, we're competing. The only thing that keeps us out of competition with one another is time zones. There's no airplane trips. There's no, and so there was this sort of, process that was, I think, beginning to open their eyes further to the fact that, in fact, their closest allies overseas were also some of their, potentially growing competitors. And I think that kind of dynamic is actually one of the ones that that we'll want to track most keenly going forward.
Yeah, thank you both very much. Judy, this is a question that came in, I think, real specific for you. And it's that you mentioned the decline in tenure track positions. What other changes in academia do you see impacting presses and societies?
Well, I think higher education is facing challenges over the next few years, regardless of the results of the upcoming election. I'd like to say we'd be able to breathe a sigh of relief, but the handwriting's not yet clear on that wall. Some of the early news from some of the academic institutions is a wake-up call in terms of what's happening with their budgets, massive cuts in capital investments, 73% freezing faculty positions, reducing salaries, cutting positions. Now that was one institution here in the state of Pennsylvania. But I think the private institutions will fare better. So that's actually, I think, favorable for the arts and humanities and people publishing in that sector. The state institutions are the ones that I think will be under the most duress because of their own income challenges, and students feeling that it's safe to return to campus. Presumably that will happen sometime next year. That will be a big change. But in addition to that, societies are also going to be facing, as publishers, are also going to be experiencing, I think, the impact on their memberships and their meetings. I think out of all of this, the opportunities that emerge are to explore more of the online environment, and I think that's what these conversations are pointing to. And the other thing I think it's pointing to is the need to, I'll echo what was said this morning, to reduce costs of publishing. So that's, again, those are trends, but I think they're being accelerated. I think if we can find ways, there was an earlier question about monetization. I think if we can find ways to reduce our costs, that's where we'll actually have more revenue to work with.
Thank you. There was a broader question that came in, and this really kind of builds off that. So Laura and Roger, maybe there's some to expand on it. It was really talking about what aspects of academic publishing do you think may be permanently changed by COVID-19. So probably maybe building on what Judy was providing us some answers around some of those changes. I'm not sure if there's any additional comments that you might have or suggestions of what you see as some of those changes that may be permanent.
Well, I think a small one is we were hearing that the bottom's likely to fall out of print monographs. And I'm curious to see whether that happens or not. A lot of people were predicting that libraries wouldn't be able to, this is for the institutional market. So that may be a big permanent transition, and all the more reason to have digital versions and to get them into distribution channels as quickly as possible. I I do think just to build on something that Roger was talking about, I do think there might be more exploration of partnerships of various sorts. Roger, you talked about the sort of frenemy piece of this, but there's really finding the right fit between what you're good at and what others are good at, and how to build the right kind of coalitions around that could be really valuable, especially in trying to think about ways to save money or redirect money. So I do think partnerships could be a piece of it. I think there's just going to be a huge need for better technology, whether that's how to run a meeting, whether that's, online education stuff. It's just that the bar is absolutely raised, and how we all respond to that is going to be an issue. And I also think the last thing is, like, for smaller societies and presses, I think the need for some really hard thinking about things is going to be front and center in the next few years.
Thank you, Roger. Do you have anything to add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would give just a tiny bit more emphasis to is that I think we're going to see increasing pressure. Some of our interviewees really discussed this quite directly among the scholarly societies, to think about, membership organizations in general are going through a period of consolidation and questioning how many memberships do individuals or organizations want to retain. And I just think that that's something to really give thought to, like, what's the right way to organize the scholarly networks and that we've built up. And you can see in different fields, Laura and I were just talking about this yesterday, you can see in different fields the actual way that those networks are organized in terms of how they're reflected in the structure of the societies, the number of societies, whether there's one big society with lots of little sections underneath it, or many different societies in a given field. I think there's going to be a period of at least implicit re-examination of some of the very deepest assumptions about what are our societies, how are they organized, what do they respond to. And I think Laura and Judy have already touched to some degree on this, but I really just wanted to make sure to emphasize that. I think it's an important trend we'll see more of.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. There's a couple other questions coming in. Let's see how we can pose this to you in the right way. I think that this was coming in probably from a small society, and there were some concerns maybe that is there a feeling that maybe publishers are not going to want their journals anymore? Is there a feeling out there that, or is there really still something that they feel there should be Endeavor where they continue to publish?
So the question is a society's publishing program, a small society's publishing program, going to remain vital?
Right. They're concerned maybe, is there a sense that there isn't a need for that or anymore from some of the publishers?
If that was in response at all to my observation, I don't think it was any sense that the value of the individual journal wouldn't be there or anything like that. I don't actually think, I mean, Laura, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we really heard any questioning of the value of the underlying product, the underlying publication. I don't think that was really an issue at all. I think it was actually a matter of thinking about the various kinds of partnerships and structures that make those publications possible. Am I speaking?
No, I completely agree. As a matter of fact, we heard the opposite, and in a funny way, I mean, in an inspiring way, a lot of confidence from some of the smaller publishers who have a niche that is that they're very close to their scholars and to the what scholarly communication needs are in that field, and that now this is not talking about whether libraries will be able to afford those, but I even think there was some confidence there that if you actually are publishing a niche and you're the best journal in that niche, that it's going to, you're going to survive. So I don't think this is like a worrisome trend that Now, I'll say one other thing too, that there is a threat that fields might be stressed in some ways. I mean, we heard, from some people that the cuts in the humanities could be, could be really worrisome as some of these departments get scaled back or even closed down. So to that extent that a society is publishing a field that starts to have a bit of a wobble in terms of the economy cutbacks, I guess that would be a worry. But it still feels like for a lot of these fields that this is the essential communication avenue.
I would add that as long as there's an audience for it, I think there will be a need for it. If the question is it possible that the commercial publishers would no longer be interested in hosting it? I think that's a cost factor. If they can continue to do so at lower cost and have it be part of a large collection of content that they're selling, the big deal still prevails, then I think the economics will work in its favor. Otherwise, I think if it becomes too costly, or I can't imagine a library isolating a group of content and saying, we don't want this. But when they break up the big deals, they are prioritizing content. So I think we'll have to wait and see how that plays out to fully answer that question. I think it'll be economically driven.
Great. Extremely helpful. Thank you, everybody. I think really good detailed explanation and comments. Thank you to the publishers for those questions that came in. And to all of you, really appreciate your time in putting your thoughts here and providing a summary of the information that you've gathered and learned. Especially that's so important to our university presses and societies that have joined today. So I want to thank all the publishers who've joined today. This is going to conclude the first day of our presentations. And my hope here again is that you were able to get a good view today about the perspectives that JSTOR has, the learnings that we've gathered, and then hear, based on from our presentation today, what some of those opportunities are for you as a university press and society, and thinking about the challenges, and where JSTOR, hopefully on your mind, can be thought of as a partner to help through that. Thank you very much.